When I first came to Tucson, I rented an apartment on, or a little casita on Campbell Avenue north of the River Road. And in that area, I lived for a while, and I met a lady there whom I later married. And we married in 1960, late 1960, moved up North Alvernon, and we started looking and renting and looking for a house to buy. And we were looking, and we'd go out east of Tucson where most of the place was, and hated the traffic and couldn't find anything that we really liked. And my wife wanted something in particular that wasn't being done in a lot of the homes. At that time, they were putting like the washing machine and stuff right as almost part of the kitchen. And she didn't like that. She wanted a separate laundry room. So we spread that word around, and a realtor that we ran into says, "Oh, I have a home out on the other side of town. Let's go out and take a look at it that has a separate laundry room." And we went out, took a look at it, and it was a model home, one of the 3 model homes in the Shadow Mountain Estates, and they were trying to sell it, and we liked it, and so we told them we'd buy it. The idea came about in 1968 when the mayor of Tucson, Jim Kriegh, announced that he was going to annex mountain to mountain. And there was actually a picture in the paper, one of the papers, where he had a map completely surrounding Tucson of all the areas that he wanted to annex. And that included the Catalina foothills, the Catalina Mountains, Tucson Mountains, and around south. Now, part of the concern was most of the people, of course, did not want to be part of Tucson that he was talking about, but the laws then were a little different than they are today. All he had to do was pick up 51% of the assessed valuation in the map to take everything in. So a lot of the people in the foothills were afraid the businesses around, particularly on the south side and so forth, would offset the assessed valuation in the foothills. And a group of homeowners covering the foothills, Tucson Mountains, all got together to try to see what they could do to stop this. At the time, they even prepared some bumper stickers saying, kicking, stomping, screaming, yes, annexation, no, because Jim Kriegh said he'd take them in kicking, stomping, and screaming. In our area, I happened to be at that time the president of the Shadow Mountain Homeowners Association, and my wife worked for an attorney that lived in Flecha Caída of the Catalina foothills. Attorney Ellsworth Triplett started studying the laws about incorporation, and he asked my wife Margie to let me get in touch with him, which I did, and he said in looking at the laws and studying around Tucson, he thought we were probably the only area that could even consider incorporating. And we had to be further than 6 miles from the city of Tucson, and we had to have common interest and goals, and it wasn't essential that we had a shopping center or anything because we were modeling ourselves out of Paradise Valley, which went clear to the state Supreme Court to get incorporated, and they didn't have the businesses and so forth that some of the people thought we should have. So I talked to our homeowners association board members about it, and they said, let's go for it. So I got together with Professor Newland at the university who taught surveying at the university, and I used to teach surveying at the University of Colorado before I came down here to teach in the civil engineering department. We got together and decided to see what that 6-mile limit would look like. So we established the 6-mile limit, and even had to get to a point where we had to swing an arc of a circle, and we missed that 6-mile limit by 2 feet. In other words, we went 6-mile limit plus 2 feet. We were 2 feet further in one spot. Then I went ahead and drew up meets and bounds description covering Shadow Mountain Estates East, Linda Vista Citrus Tracts, half of Campobello Estates, and Oro Valley Country Club. And at first, I included Highlands Trailer Park. Then we saw what we had. We counted the people. We had to have at least 500 people or bodies. Now, it didn't have to be adults, anybody, men, women, and children living in the area to consider incorporating. And I counted the people, and I think it was 791 bodies that I came up with. So we said we had enough people, we had common goals and interests, and we were further than 6 miles, so we had something we could go with. I contacted Oro Valley Country Club Estates at the time, and the president of the Oro Valley Country Club Estates, I believe it was Bob Daly, at the time was working with Pima County to get their roads paved. And Pima County was working on that, so he did not want to jeopardize that situation, having their streets paved and so forth down there. So just had to sit quiet for some time, and until it was 2 years later when Steve Engel became president of the Oro Valley Homeowners Association. I talked to Steve about it, and he was all for the idea. So we continued looking into it, talking to more people, and of course in that 2 years the area grew a little bit. There was a little bit larger population. I talked to Highlands. They could not get 51% of the people to go for the idea, so we took them off of the map. Our first map, we decided that we'd call it the Town of Palo Verde. We had a list of about 10 names, and we decided to call it the Town of Palo Verde. Considering the Town of Palo Verde, it later on did show that there was a Palo Verde nuclear plant in Palo Verde west of Phoenix, so we were going to have to change it. But I happened to run into a gentleman called Jack Spalding, and I met him up at a filling station. In fact, the people at the filling station suggested to me, I asked them if they knew him, and said, oh yes, this was up here at the corner of Ina and Oracle at the mobile station, Ike's mobile station. And they said, oh yes, we know Jack Spalding. He says, he might be a little rough, you might want to be careful, but he said he's sitting right out there in the car. So I went out and talked to him and got along with him great. And then he liked the idea of incorporating. And it was probably a few weeks later he suggested to me, says, if you really want to get the people in Oro Valley Country Club along behind it, call it the Town of Oro Valley. I said, okay, that's fine by us, and all of our people was fine by. And I'm glad that we did decide that. It's been a name that I think we can all be proud of. Yeah, I think part of our hesitant first is that, well, we can't call it Oro Valley Country Club. We didn't really have their permission, or the Town of Oro Valley. But after it came out apparent that they liked that idea, then it was well received. The things that probably really drove us into continuing with the incorporation after we talked over the idea is that we wanted to control our own destiny. Our police protection was not too good, not because necessarily speaking against the Pima County Sheriff's Department. They were spread too thin. They just could not start to cover the areas. So we thought that if we could gain control of our area, then the things that we decided out in our way would be decided by the people living out there. Because we would often go down to planning and zoning or the board of supervisors to have something to say it was affecting us, and they seemed like they cared less whether we were there. There was just rarely any response to anything we had to say. So those were the things that really got us going. After we had decided that we could incorporate, we decided to make the move. We knew that the city of Tucson and Pima County were both against us, and the newspapers were against us. The Tucson Citizen, the Tucson Daily Star, they all spoke against the idea of another incorporated town. At that time, there was only 2 incorporated towns in Pima County, City of Tucson and South Tucson. City of Tucson had South Tucson surrounded. So we knew that they didn't want us to exist. And so when we decided to follow through in the incorporation, we decided to circulate petitions. We circulated the petitions Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and turned them in on Monday so the City of Tucson wouldn't have time to annex anything and put us within the 6-mile limit. I think that the City of Tucson felt that they, one, would start losing money. They wanted to control the whole valley, have it under one government, and I think those were some of the driving forces. They did not want, and it was often said, they did not want us to become like Phoenix with a lot of satellite cities around it. So, in fact, after we did become incorporated, there was still a lot of resistance from the City of Tucson and Pima County. In fact, when we filed the petitions, of course, the Board of Supervisors, even though the law says if we meet the criteria, they shall incorporate you, they did not. They said no, and then they gave excuses like, well, you can't buy a loaf of bread or a cup of coffee in Oro Valley. We ended up having to go to court, and this took a 4-year court battle. We had to file suit against Pima County because they did not incorporate us, and that was first going to be heard in the City of Tucson, but an attorney had advised us if it was heard in the City of Tucson, in Pima County and the City of Tucson, we wouldn't stand a chance in court. You better get a change of venue. And we did get a change of venue to Pinal County. So our court case was then going to be heard and was heard up in Pinal County. The court case was, I think, fairly simple in as much as we went through all the criteria that was necessary for the incorporation according to the laws. They did challenge the 6-mile limit and really wanted to know how we came up with that we were 6 miles, further than 6 miles, Pima County was challenging it. And we explained to them, well, we used the coordinate system that Pima County had established that Professor Newland developed for them and had hired him to develop it. So we used that coordinate system and established the 6-mile limit from that, and Professor Newland is the one that did it. That dropped all challenges to the 6-mile limit right then and there. Well, it turned out that the judge in Pinal County, after he ruled in our favor, that he became ill and he couldn't finalize the papers. During that time, City of Tucson annexed an area and put us within 6 miles, and then went to the Court of Appeals, or the local court that's in the Tucson area, and they ruled against us and said we weren't incorporated because we were within 6 miles of the City of Tucson. So the only other place we could go was the state Supreme Court. When it got to the state Supreme Court, they ordered that Pima County to incorporate us. Pima County sort of stalled around for a while until they finally, I think it was Bud Walker, who was Board of Supervisors, that said if they want to be incorporated, let's incorporate them. And they voted to incorporate us at that time. There was some very strong opposition to start developing in the town, and the biggest opposition actually came from 2 people that live in the same area that I live in the Shadow Mountain Estates. And they would have meetings, and they had Pima County out, some Pima County officials out that would told the people how much it was going to cost us in taxes if we became a town, that we would have to take care of our own sewers and many things like that, and had a lot of people scared. So they were building quite a bit of opposition to the idea. Well, then I think that these people who are against it had it figured out that they knew how they were going to stop the town. Pima County agreed to appoint the first council from two people that were for the town, which was Steve Engel and myself, and two people that were definitely against the town, which was Virgil Brandon and Dorothy Montgomery, and somebody that was supposedly neutral, Kenneth Holford. Now, after we were appointed to council and getting started, there was every effort by, of course, two to make things not work. There was effort from two of us trying to make things work. And I think Kenneth Holford, my own personal opinion is, he was against the town from the very beginning. In fact, I went up and tried to get a restraining order to keep him from being appointed. The first official election, actually, 4 people that were against the town were elected to the council, and Lauren Rood, who was for the town, was the only person that made it on the council, and he made it by a recount and 1 vote. And I have always said Lauren Rood was clever enough, smart enough, that he almost completely controlled the other 4 on the council. They could not do the things that they wanted. He knew how to handle the situation. They found that, but they did make a motion to disincorporate the town and passed the motion, of course, 4-1, but they found out, the town attorney says you can't do that. You don't disincorporate a town that way. And when they found out they couldn't do it, then they wanted to start circulating petitions to disincorporate the town the way they found out they had to do it, and that was tried. And one of the big leaders in circulating the petitions was Orville Shields, who helped us get the signatures for the town. In fact, he got 100% of all the signatures in the area that he lived in for the town. But for some reason, he decided to try to fight it, and he tried to collect signatures. He had a beacon light out at night and circulating. He'd get anybody's signature, whether they lived in the town or not. And they had a lot of signatures, but they didn't have enough to successfully disincorporate the town. At first, what made the town successful was the fact that we had volunteers. Everybody was a volunteer. Our building inspectors were qualified electricians or mechanical engineers that could really do plan check and inspections. We had planning and zoning. We had the clerk. We volunteers first until we started getting some revenue. The majority, after they were elected, would not appoint me as town engineer, but eventually they did. In fact, one of the people that elected made a motion was another person that came on the council a little later that was still against the idea, but he said that he knew that I would be volunteer engineer, and he made the motion to appoint me, and I was then, yeah. The first mayor was Kenneth Holford, and then he was followed by Dick Colt, who lived in Oro Valley Country Club. Dick Colt was not necessarily for the idea of the town, but as mayor, he turned the town around. He did, and he said he was going to do what was necessary, even though he was not for the idea to run the town, and he actually turned it around and got things going. After him was Lois Lamberson, who lived in Shadow Mountain Estates. Then after Lois Lamberson was Steve Engel. And then Steve served as mayor for a long time, and he was well liked and respected, I think, by everybody living in the town of Oro Valley. When the town first got started, as I said, we had a lot of volunteers, and that kept us going until some revenue started coming in. But as we started getting bigger, we had to hire a town clerk, we had to hire a building of a planning and zoning commission director, pay building officials, and pay building inspectors. So the revenue started drying up. In other words, it was going backwards. And it was just about the time that we were going to go from maybe a $200,000 surplus down into the red when Mr. George Johnston came along and suggested that he wanted to build a hotel. He asked that he asked the area to be annexed before the hotel was ever built and to the town. And the town did annex the area, and then I know I was with George up on the place where he overlooking the site when he said, I would like to build a resort hotel here. His dream of building this big hotel. It was the first resort hotel in the metropolitan Tucson area. It became very successful. It also turned the financial picture of the town around because of the building permit fees coming in and all the casitas and other developments that followed it. The building became, in the town, really started to move, and more homes and everything were being done. And the town then started becoming well-heeled and financially sound. Today, that resort's name is the Hilton El Conquistador. But it was all done in a way that our engineers, the firms that we hired, stayed on top of it. We paid them extra. We charged the developer, the builder, an extra plan check fee percentage to cover those costs, which he was fully agreeable to, so that they could build it fast. We actually opened that hotel 11 months from the day we broke ground. One of our councilmen, Steve Reniker, who was a former councilman, he also an attorney and used to do some development in the town, but he later was on the council, and he and I became good friends. He lived up in the foothills. He has a telescope, and he used to watch the bighorn sheep, and he called me over one time to his house to hurry over so I could see all the bighorn sheep up there at the end of Push Peak. They were up there grazing. Well, the park was built by Pima County, and it was built just before, I believe within a year or so before we became a town. It was named Dennis Weaver Park, who was one of the Board of Supervisors, Pima County Board of Supervisors, that said no to our incorporation that cost us a 4-year court battle. A lot of the citizens, newer citizens, thought it was Dennis Weaver, the actor, that it was named after. And they were surprised. They had asked me about it, and I'd say, no, it was a Board of Supervisor. It was, I know, I had always said, and we always said, if the county always tried to get us to take over the park when we couldn't afford it, and when a very small percentage of the people living in Oro Valley were the ones using the park. And it came later on as Oro Valley grew and more percentage of the people were using the park, that the town did agree, and I think rightfully so, to take it over. I'd probably always said it should be called Oro Valley Park, not Dennis Weaver, because Dennis Weaver was not a name that we really enjoyed, considering the battle that he caused us. It was the council's decision to name it after me, and it's an honor, but I didn't ask him to do it. Oro Valley's gotten certainly a lot larger. It used to be driving out this way, there was hardly any traffic, and I was always glad to have that little traffic when I came back from the university. Now the traffic is quite heavy at times, but I really expected it. And I think the town's doing a lot to handle that. I like the way the town's growing. I think that, to me, the Hilton El Conquistador was one big asset for the town. I think that the hospital, Northwest Hospital, is another big asset for the town. And I think these things are going to keep the town growing, developing, bringing in more business and so forth, to make it and try to keep it the town that the people like. I think the one thing about Oro Valley that I've always liked is the people that live in it seem to really like it. One time we were rated the safest town in the country. That we have good police protection. We have controllable planning and zoning and development, and that it is a town that people can come to, and hopefully eventually they will be able to enjoy all the various things that they might like in the form of arts, recreation, and other facilities. And then the other thing I'd say, if you have a dream of something that needs to be done and feels should be done, do it.